Hello everybody and welcome back to the 16th episode of Tides of Lore. My name is Robert Silva and I am one half of your host team, joined as always by my good friend Tim. How we doing today, Tim?
I'm doing well, man. Anxiously waiting for the next WoW season. Bought Monster Hunter in the meantime. Gonna try that out.
Haven't started it yet then?
No, I'm waiting. I'm gonna play it when Jake gets here. Play it
Fair
on
enough.
the TV. Yeah. What about you?
I mean, I've been grinding mounts, trying to still get some of those legacy ones. We both got some mythic Legion mounts this last week. You getting the Nighthold one and me getting the Argus one. But
Get anything else other than that?
I mean, I've got pretty much all my reps for the War Within up to max with the exception of the Undermine factions. So I got a bunch of mounts from that, but no drops. No drops.
Yeah.
Typical.
It'll come.
But, I mean, I've been looking at Monster Hunter too. I'm not going to pick it up for a while, but I was thinking about if I were to, what weapon I'd want to use, and I think I'd be a Horn player this time.
A Horn player.
Yeah, bro, I'm trying
Horn.
to jam out, bro.
I mean, I am not mad playing with a Horn, because don't they buff the group? Aren't they like a bard, kind of?
They do, but it's also like you could swing it like a big-ass hammer. Not as much as like the actual hammer, but regardless, still just like bonk someone and then, play a nasty sax solo on them, bro.
Well, it'd be fun because I play hammer, so we would both be just bonking them.
Yes, sir.
That would be a good time.
But last episode, we discussed the events of all of the black dragons outside of Onyxia with Nefarian and stuff like that. What do we remember about that episode, too?
Yeah, I remember talking about Nefarian and him going to Outland, laying a bunch of eggs on Outland, which is cool. It kind of explains how the dragons got out there. What was the fell explosion from? There was a fell explosion.
Fell explosion comes from Ner'zhul opening all the portals before he jumps through and becomes captured by Kill Jaden, and it destabilizes the planet even further and just pops that bitch into the nether, twisting nether.
And then makes the netherwing dragons, right?
It seems to corrupt pretty much all the eggs out on Outland.
Yeah, so we talked about that. We talked a little bit about High Mountain and what was his name, Abyssian, and his coming to be. And I think that's mainly what we talked about, right? Maybe a little bit of Blackrock Spire.
Yeah, we talked about Blackwing Lair and Upper Blackrock Spire and stuff like that. The Red Dragon, Valrostros or Valiostros. We'll just call him Vel, make it simple. But yeah, pretty much all of the stuff that leads into that raid of Classic. And now we're going to cover some of the events today of the Zul'Gurub and the Trolls and all of their history, which is probably going to be a pretty beefy episode. So let's move on into the comments from last week. Last week we did get some comments. Number one being from @Gandor1853 saying, "Here I am, doom scrolling just to learn about one of my favorite WoW NPCs, smiley face." And that was on the Varian shorts that we've been uploading. And I thought, hey, man, doom scrolling can be educational too. Let's go.
Best kind.
Yes, sir. We did also have @PostGarode, Google, 2389 saying, "I really love this kind of format. A duo of podcasts just talking about specific subjects and stories about a niche subject. I hope you'll continue this way. Loktar Ogar."
Yeah, fellow Horde player. Let's go.
I'm kind of conflicted nowadays because I play significantly more Horde than I do Alliance, but it's really even now.
When I play Classic, I play Alliance. When I play Retail, I play Horde. So I feel like I play a healthy medium, but I mean, I've been Horde for a long time. Right?
Yeah. I genuinely did not play Horde until I started hanging out with you in Legion expansion.
Still been
almost 8 years, 9 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've been playing Horde a while, man.
That Demon Hunter is just so much fun. I love Demon Hunter. And then we also had Brady Sword 11. Welcome back, Brady Sword, asking, "How did Marshal Windsor acquire the information about Onyxia being behind all of this?" To which I responded, "It's not too clear how he comes to the conclusion that it's exactly Katrana, but he is Bolvar's right-hand man, so it kind of makes sense that Bolvar growing suspicious of Varian being potentially a black dragon himself, and in contact with Magni, who's also kind of assuming similar things. He is sent out to the Burning Steppes to investigate, where he witnesses a battle between the Blackrock orcs and the Dark Iron, at which point he is captured by the Dark Iron, but it can be reasoned that he probably deciphered Anixia's identity from one of these Blackrock before being captured.
You do that in the Anixia attunement. So that part is pretty much the same as what you do in game.
I think that makes sense. And then very lastly, we had At the Time Lost Crow. And I'm going to try and summarize this one because it was a pretty long paragraph from both of us, just saying mana addiction in elf culture was such an interesting point in the lore for me as a kid. I used to think that they were all just mana addicts before the Sunwell and that they were just sipping from the well all the time. It wasn't until Suramar and Legion that it really hit you just how it affects them and how it was part of their culture growing up. And then he also states, it almost kind of makes what Brawl did to Valeera seem kind of heartless, if not for the fact that she would have put the mission in jeopardy. And I responded, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially when you consider that they originate from being highborn in the Night Elf Empire, where they would have been around the Well of Eternity, which would have been such an intense arcane power every single day of their life that they just lived around. But also that with the Valeera topic, we didn't have time to cover all the stuff that she gets into during the Variant story, but it is... Also, like, there's a scene where she's at the Thandal Span where after she's been fell cursed, she literally bites a demon, a fellhound, and rips its throat out and debatably, like, swallows it. What? So, yeah. So, I mean, she does it to kill it, but, I mean, even just that is like, oh. And even when the Black Dragon is going to try and attack Varian at Ironforge, she can't get a hold of the magic dagger that it has before it flies away, and she starts speaking in Eredun, which is the language that the Legion speaks. So it seems kind of clear that, yeah, I mean, she would have put the mission in jeopardy, but also that she was kind of clearly becoming completely controlled by fell magic and the Legion and stuff like that, and essentially probably would have been corrupted and died from that. So it does feel cruel how Brawl handled it, but it is, kind of a very real story of addiction and how people who don't always want the help that they need, truly. And that is all we have for comments from last week. If you guys did want to get a comment in the next episode, make sure you drop a comment and we will perhaps feature you in one of these next episodes. So moving into this episode, today's episode is Trolls. We're going to be talking all about the origins of the Trolls and the events that they get up to leading into the events of classic World of Warcraft, ending off with the Zul'Gurub raid with the Horde and stuff like that. So let's get into that. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Tides of Lore on YouTube, or if you're on Spotify, leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps the channel and ensures you won't miss a moment of this adventure. Now let's get started. So, like we kind of mentioned in the Night Elf episode, long before there were pretty much any races, there was the Well of Eternity. And with the Well of Eternity just being this intense, arcane, magical font of energy that seems to draw from the cosmos itself, it kind of magically accelerated the evolution of creatures that would be found around this Well of Eternity. And from that, we would basically spawn some of the earliest species on the planet that we know of, being the Trolls. And they would form like their own little, well, not little, their own culture, as well as having their own tribes that would get up to all sorts of different stuff. Specifically, one of the major points that we would have for them is like well over 2,000 years before the Dark Portal existed. There would be these tribes, and they would be governed by what is called Shadow Hunters. And Shadow Hunters still exist in modern WoW, and they're kind of these like mystical warriors. They're said to be like mythic heroes in the lore, basically. And they kind of walk the edge between light and dark magic, being able to channel healing blessings as well as destructive curses, kind of like priests do, but more of like an actual combat role.
Are they stealth? For some reason, I thought they might be.
I mean, I would definitely say that they're stealthy. I mean, when you think about Trolls, I feel like you kind of think about like an ambush hunter who kind of, pops out of the forest and fucks you up and then disappears into the shadows, right?
Yeah. People have talked about this as like a hero class.
Yeah, me and Bub were talking about this, and I think that they would be a great hero class. You could have what you would be like a voodoo master be like your DPS spec, and then like witch doctor as a healing spec or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, they have like hero talents now. Maybe they'll integrate it into shaman, or I don't know.
I'm not too sure, but I do know that like the story of Vol'Jin that comes like way later down the line would, I personally think, make a kind of a really good bridge into introducing them as as a new hero class, if they ever decide to get back to a story like that, that is. So early troll customs, mostly it was tribe to tribe, and there would just kind of be a lot of them that would spread across ancient Kalimdor, and some of them would practice stuff like cannibalism, what they would understand as magic through their shamanistic practices with the Loa, meditation, stuff like that. So it was kind of all different depending on which tribes you would get, and this is something that does manage to maintain throughout the lifespan of the trolls. Even nowadays, like the Gurubashi trolls aren't the exact same as the Amani trolls, and even them aren't anything like the ones that are in the far north of Northrend, the Drakari. So it is really what they build their entire identity around. But what all of them do worship is these deities that we spoke about back in the War of the Ancients, the Loa. And the Loa are just what they describe the wild gods as. So what Varian's kind of wild god that he embodies of Goldrin is, what Malfurion's wild god of Cenarius embodies, what the trolls would refer to them as Loa. And it is through this myth, like magical worship and practice and almost, like I said, almost shamanistic connection to them, that they would begin to gain really like blessings, and I mean sometimes even curses, but well, mostly we think about it as blessings. So like there's a Loa called Luku, and he is like the spirit of regeneration, and it's why the trolls have such healing factors and stuff like that. It's said that they're able to, it's kind of hit or miss, because I mean some characters of the trolls, it's like, well, then he was stabbed in the chest, I'm not going to say who, and he dies, and that's it. But then there's other times where you hear about like certain troll figures that have been completely immersed in shadow flame and had half their body burned away and still managed to regrow a certain amount of it or all of it. So it is seemingly through different worships that they are able to gain healing or even, you know, curses for their foes and whatnot, depending on which of these wild gods they focus their worship around.
Are different tribes hostile? Is like an Amani?
Yes, I mean in Modern WoW definitely. Like there's obviously like we're chill with the Zandalari, we're chill with the Dark Spears, but we're not chill with the Amani, we're not chill with the Gurubashi. But back in the day, it was mostly just the trolls themselves as being kind of the main sentient tribes of the world. So they were kind of spreading all across Kalimdor, and they would fight with each other, and they would have rivalries, but it was mostly that they were already intelligent enough. Like if we do fight with each other, it was probably just going to end up that we would one of us would win, but both of us would be weakened so much by the conflict that going to war with one another was never really a logical option for them if they wanted to not be killed by other threats around them.
But they weren't necessarily like working with each other though.
Not really, not at the time, but they did have like cultural hubs. And just to touch on some of their Loa worship a little bit before we do get into that, they did also have the masks. Like you'll see a lot of trolls wearing masks that seem to kind of be made out of wood, and like they're like bony looking, and they have paint on them and stuff like that. These were called Rushka. And these Rushka were basically what the shadow hunters and the devout Loa followers would create by going into basically deep meditation states. And when they would do this, they would see the spiritual face of the Loa. And by trying to shape these masks around what their visions of this chosen Loa would be, it would kind of gain them even more of the Loa's like blessing and essence by understanding what these creatures kind of were in a greater way. And yeah, so that's why you'll see shadow hunters. That's why you'll see all sorts of trolls wear these masks. And even these masks, if they weren't properly taken care of, could become sentient and dangerous on their own right. So you'll see some of that stuff if you do like the Zul'Gurub raid or like the Zul'Aman raid. But that does bring us back to the kind of their culture like you were talking about. Initially, the kind of earliest troll civilization, like cultural hub that we know of, was actually in the jungle, what would be modern day Nazmir in the Zuldazar Islands, which originally it was kind of this city called Zul'Nizman. And it was kind of just where they would flourish to begin trading amongst all these different tribes. But unfortunately, in this nearby area, there is also what is a Titan facility. And in this Titan facility called Uldir, they worked on pretty fucked up experiments, kind of disturbing ways that they could try and the Titan Keepers would try and figure out how to better contain the old gods as well as maybe kill them or make them tick or something like that.
This was Battle for Azeroth, right?
Yes,
You're talking
sir.
about that zone right above the hub for the Horde? Yeah.
And unfortunately, through these disturbing experiments, they did manage to create something. And it's basically, it's still not entirely clear exactly what this creature is, but I'm just going to call it an artificial old god aspect, which is basically to say this is kind of a manufactured old god. It's not as powerful as the other ones, but it was basically the embodiment of rot and decay, and it goes by the name of Gahun. And with the creation of Gahun, it begins to spread this rot all through Nazmir, and it begins to turn this land from its lush jungle-like area into a kind of decrepit, dying swamp instead. And the trolls see this, and they're just like, well, shit. So they decide, pretty much all of them, to go on this grand exodus. Few of them stay and kind of worship this entity, but we'll get into that more when we do get to the Battle for Azeroth, because that's a whole story. But they move south into this mountain range known as the Zandalar Mountains. And in the Zandalar Mountains, they begin to build these massive temple cities atop all of them. And specifically, the largest of these troll tribes that would be there and would claim the highest slopes of them all would be the Zandalari tribe. So they are attracted to this mountain range because it is said this is where a bunch of the Loa themselves actually live in the world of Azeroth. So that's why they kind of set down here. And so yeah, the Zandalari kind of take up the highest mountains, and they fall under the rule of this man named King Dazar, who is the first person to ever tame the raptors for the troll race, which, I mean, as we know, even in the earliest iterations of World of Warcraft, is their racial mount. It's kind of what they bond with as a creature. And there are other smaller tribes that do like build on the smaller mountains nearby, and it kind of leads to this caste system where, you know, you're kind of born into what role you're going to be in life, but that is kind of not too important at the moment. What is important is that they are kind of encouraged to just go wherever they want to, with the exception of there is one part of the Zandalar Mountains that they are told do not go ever, by their priests, by the shadow hunters, by everybody. And they said there will be cataclysmic consequences if you ever do go to this place. And it's like this mound of black stone that they think. And for many, many generations, these troll generations are too afraid to go anywhere near it, until there is this man of the trolls by the name of Zando. And Zando, somehow, someway, we don't get an entire description of how it has come into being. We actually just barely got this information in the most recent World of Warcraft expansion. Comes into contact with a sentient old god artifact, a blade known as Xalatath. Yeah.
Oh, great.
And
the same one that we know today?
The very same one, and the same one from the Legion expansion for the priest artifact as well.
Okay.
And while the sentient dagger is basically whispering in his ear, being like, yeah, you should go to that mount. I hear there's really cool stuff over there. He kind of falls under the corruption of this blade. And just to make it super clear, this blade is a void object. I'm not going to get too detailed into it, but know that it is very important for the story today, even. So Zando goes against the prohibitions of his people and takes this blade over there with a bunch of his followers. And with this, he begins to perform blood sacrifices, basically chopping off the limbs of his own people using this blade and making blood sacrifices to this stone object, which he personally is being like corrupted to believe is a sleeping Loa. It's not, because after he does finally seem to get enough power for it, he drives the blade into this object, and it shows that it is in fact a Kith'ix by the name of Kith'ix, which is, we mentioned the Kith'ix back during the Origin episodes. They're kind of these leftover generals from the Black Empire, these super powerful faceless kind of, that are, well, seemingly just kind of hibernating in certain parts across the world. A lot of them have been locked up, but a lot of them, like the ones that ended up killing Tyr and stuff like that, are not. So he drives us into it, and it seems to awaken this creature, and this creature seems to kill all of them, really. It doesn't make it entirely clear what happens, but it does say that there are trolls that later go on to find this site, and they just find bones. And the bones literally don't have any meat on them. They've been completely picked clean.
Oh my. Yeah, those guys, they're tough, man.
They are indeed. And with this being the case, this Kith'ix called Kith'ix begins to mentally connect with the Aqir that are also slumbering deep within the earth. And we mentioned the Aqir during that origin episode as well. They are the army of the old gods, and they're kind of like these insectoid-like creatures that have been crafted from the flesh of the old gods themselves. So he's like, hey guys, I noticed that we lost the war apparently. Get up. It's time for round 2. So Kith'ix summons all of these Aqir from the ground, and they begin to create vast underground cities to work to overtake this new troll empire, basically being like, I'm going to crush these trolls. We're going to just get back to it, apparently. So they build this underground layer called Aqir, and it's like the sprawling civilization with the whole purpose of bringing down the troll civilization. And yeah, eventually, I think it's either hundreds of years or thousands of years after this, they just come pouring out of these tunnels, and they go to wage war on this troll empire. And now with Kith'ix at the front of it, and the basically non-stop horde of these insectoid creatures, which the trolls are good hunters, and they had fought plenty of enemies and stuff like that before, but they had never faced like a cohesive enemy the way that the Aqir are. So it is, for a while, realize like a pretty like brutal affair where they are just basically facing extinction. So they beckon all these tribes that are, spread all across Azeroth at this point to come together in Zandalar, and they're like, guys, we need to unite so that we can fuck up the Aqir.
How many troll factions are trying to unite?
It isn't too clear. What they do state about when the Aqir first show up is that most of the smaller ones are immediately wiped out. They stand no chance. So, I mean, we know of the big 4, the big 3, the Drukhari, the Zandalari, the Amani, and the Gurubashi. They all kind of exist in a primitive state at this point, but there are probably like smaller ones.
Some savage tribes right there.
So they do all come together, and they agree. They're like, all right, we're facing extinction. We have to fight this enemy together or we're going to die. And this is what founds their new empire that they call the Empire of Zul, to crush the Aqir. And the priests of all these different tribes that worship all these different Loa begin rallying the spirits to come and join them in war. So they have some of these like Bat Loa, they have some of these like Water Loa and stuff like that to face the might of Kith'ix. And during this time, basically as the Aqir are pushing on to Zandalar itself, they overwhelm the Aqir using this new shamanistic magical power that they've been granted by the Loa to defeat them. And as they all come together, they do manage to push back the Aqir, and they even manage to injure Kith'ix, who is just like, it's just not over, I shall return. And he goes running off to the northeast. And it's at this time that the trolls are all still kind of together, and they're like, we need to make sure that we hunt down every single Aqir, because if we don't, they're just going to go tunnel in somewhere, and then they're going to come back again at a later time. We can't have that shit happening. So they're like, anyone who wants to basically, honor the troll legacy, go find one of these like creches, these Aqir hubs, and attack them. And I mean, pretty much they all do. The main one that is kind of the biggest factor in this is the Amani, who, like we mentioned, are one of the biggest tribes. They actually end up tracking down Kith'ix himself, and they chase him all the way to basically the edge of what is still ancient Kalimdor, but what would be modern day eastern kingdoms. And they really, it's a suicide charge. That's how they describe it in the chronicle. But they corner him, and they just, with the help of their Loa and with as many numbers as they can, overwhelm this Kith'raxi. And as they do, they slay Kith'ix. And atop its now dead monster corpse body. They're like, I know what'll really stick it to him. We'll build a city right on top of his corpse. And this is actually what is the temple city of Zul'Aman in the Eastern Kingdoms. Wow. So that is where the Amani go. They begin to spread out from that area as well that they've taken from the Aqir. And you also have the Drukhari, who head far to the north in what would be modern-day Northrend, where they face a colony of Aqir that have actually enslaved a clan of these. They're called Tol'vir, but just understand that they are basically Titan forged, made by the Titan Keepers as well. And they have been transformed by these Aqir into what are known as obsidian destroyers. And they're kind of just these stony creatures that are seemingly kind of mindless, but super hard exoskeletons and arcanely resistant. And it does go poorly for them for a while, but with enough effort, the trolls are almost just as resilient in a certain way with their regeneration and stuff like that. They do manage to shatter their stone bodies and topple this area of the Aqir as well. So that's why you'll find the Drukhari tribes in the far north of Northrend. And then you also had the Gurubashi. And the Gurubashi seem to kind of be, outside of the Amani, the tribe that just go everywhere to kill all of them, really, because pretty much the entire south part of Kalimdor, which in modern WoW would be the southern portion of both the new Kalimdor, the continent, as well as the southern portion of the Eastern Kingdoms, they just wage war with all of these Aqir. And with specific guerrilla tactics and just kind of hit and running these Aqir, they bleed these insects dry. And through the lowest blessings, the Gurubashi wrestle the control of this corrupted Titan facility known as Ankaraj in Kalimdor away from the Aqir, as well as they take over what would be modern-day Stranglethorn Vale.
I mean, trolls get a lot of hate, but it seems like they're doing the world good, killing all these Aqir.
Yep, I mean, they truly are the first major empire of the world that manages to accomplish tons of amazing things for their time. And it does make what comes next a bit sad. So, with the Amani now in the northeast and the Drukhari in the north and the Gurubashi in the southeast, the Zandalar are all right, anyone who went out and fought these Aqir, take those lands, those are your lands. And with that, they build up their own little empires. So you have a bunch of these cities popping up. You have Zul'Gurub spawning in the Stranglethorn Vale. You have Zul'Aman in the northeast. You have Zul'Farrak in the southwest, near the area of Ankaraj. But with that, the trolls really just, their empire stretches over such a vast area. And even though it is ruled by different sets of these tribes, it's vast. I don't really know how to put it. The only empire that will ever have a larger landmass will be the Night Elves when they eventually come into power.
This is pre-Sundering, right? So this is just
yes.
One massive landmass, and they have what do you think, percentage-wise?
There is a map. I'm sure it's on screen at the moment, but to give an idea, I would say that they control probably 70-80% of the land masses, and even
wow.
the portion of the landmass that they don't control is only because there's Titan facilities there. There's the Mogu and Pandaria and stuff like that would prevent them from completely controlling that area as well. And it is even stated that. Yeah, well, and they're also they're kind of nomadic. Even before this war went off, still 20,000 years, I would say, they would go all the way to the Dragon Isles. You would find trolls, the dragon aspects mentioned in the War of the Scaleborn book, encountering creatures with blue skin and 3 fingers and, kind of rustic huts and stuff like that, all the way in the Dragon Isles, which even still, before Kalimdor shatters, is its own landmass that is off the shore. So they're clearly already very well versed in using naval technology and stuff like that, even before the landmass shatters. So that is just something that you find. And that is also where this war ends, and some of these lesser tribes are looking for their own place as well, and some of the larger tribes are starting to kind of reignite those old rivalries with one another now that they don't really have a more grand enemy to face. They just begin to spread out. And one of these smaller troll tribes are called the Dark Trolls. And they are nocturnal, basically. They only really go outside during the nighttime. They don't like the sun, and they are kind of seeking a life that is more based around finding peace with nature and finding, just a lifestyle that isn't as warlike or maybe cannibalistic or something like that, like some of these other troll tribes are. So they head north from where Zuldazar is, and they will go into an area that is just off the coast of the Well of Eternity. And that's what we'll check in with them later. So back in Zandalar with the Zandalari tribes, you do have, I guess we'll just call them the Zandalari Empire really at this point, but you do have them prioritizing the connection with their Loa still, but you do also begin to see that like the Shadow Hunters and stuff like that, they begin to lose like necessarily control. Like I mentioned, they were at one point kind of like the highest authority amongst the troll tribes, and now it is becoming more like kings, more like emperors, more like actual monarchies in a certain way like that. And with that, they are looking for a bit more magical power. And with this being the case, they do recognize that there is another empire forming to the south in what would be modern-day Pandaria, and it is dominated by these once Titan-forged known as the Mogu. And the Mogu have been afflicted by the Curse of Flesh, so their minds have been kind of broken free, but they have in a certain way managed to regress it, or at the very least stop it from reaching the same levels that the Earthen or the Mechanomes would have. And with that being the case, their whole mindset still, after they kind of become free, is they're like, well, we serve the Titan Keepers, and the Titan Keepers serve the Titans. So anyone that's beneath us should serve us, logically, right?
Okay. It seems pretty zealous.
Oh, they are. They're kind of the worst when it comes to the Titan Forged. But yeah, with this specifically under their leader that goes by the name of Lei Shen and later has the title of the Thunder King, they enslaved the Jinyu and the Pandaren. And the Pandaren are pandas, like think Po from Kung Fu Panda. The Jinyu are these like fish-like creatures. I really don't know how to describe them, but humanoid body, fish head. If you've ever seen Invincible, think the Atlanteans from that series.
They walk on like regular feet, right? Bipedal.
They're bipedal. They have fingers. They hold weapons. They use spears, stuff like that. But they're like fish people. A lot of races kind of fall under this archetype in World of Warcraft. But the Pandaren also have these deities that they worship called the Augustus Celestials, and they're kind of like what would be more akin to Chinese culture of gods and stuff like that. So like Wukong, the Monkey King, stuff like that. But so they call upon their gods to face Lei Shen and prevent them from being enslaved. And this is where you realize just how powerful Lei Shen is. And we're going to talk about it way more when we get into Pandaria, because they have such a beefy lore and such a long history. But Lei Shen is nearly just godlike figure. He is so powerful that he manages to physically beat down most of these godlike creatures by himself. And with that being the case, the Pandaren are like, well, fuck, can't do anything about that then. And yeah, they are enslaved. The Jinyu are enslaved. Pretty much all of the races of Pandaria would be enslaved, with the exception of certain ones that were just like, I think it's better than being slaves if we just join up with him. And yeah, like I said, the Zandalari will begin to see this empire, and they're like, let's team up with these guys. Because while the Mogu don't necessarily think that the Zandalari are like they're equal or anything like that, or even the Zandalari think that they're equal, the kind of like the early trolls realize that if they are to just fight with each other, it's probably that they will both lose in the long run.
If you can't beat them, join them.
Yep. So
I think that's their mindset right now.
So with this being the case, they're like, all right, we'll support you in your military endeavors. The Zandalari tell the Mogu, and you guys can give us some of what you know about magical, like about the arcane, basically. And they, shake on it. And now there is this unification between the Zandalari Empire and the Mogu Empire. Thank you for tuning in to Tides of Lore. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your fellow adventurers. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you. And with this, Lei Shen eventually is just like, I want some more land. And he sees this spot that's over in what would be modern day Kalimdor on the west coast by the name of Uldum. He's like, they got a bunch of cool Titan tech in there. I'm sure that will make my people even more powerful. I'm going to go get it. And the Tol'vir, who, like I mentioned before, were these other Titan keepers, or Titan forged rather, were like, yeah, you want it? Come get it, bitch. And he's like, bet, I will. So he gets his army of Mogu. He gets the Zandalari, and they begin to just make their way to Uldum. And, you know, confident as they are, they're like, we're currently also being afflicted by the curse of flesh, so we're getting all squishy, which sucks. And logically, Lei Shen is too powerful for us to beat. So you know what we're going to do? We have this essentially doomsday device. We talked about this kind of in the Origins episode as well. But when the Titans came to Azeroth, they would create these massive forges. And these forges were used to create the Titan, like the Titan Keepers and the Titan Forge and stuff like that. But there was also one of them called the Forge of Origination, which essentially existed if the planet ever became corrupted by old god powers again, that it would just unleash this scouring event that would purge all the life from Azeroth. And
like earthquakes would form, and
I think it's
natural disasters, or
I think it's more like it would literally just like burn the cells of life from existence. And at the time, this place of Uldum is a lush jungle. It is just covered in all sorts of rivers and waterfalls and jungle. Think kind of like the Ungoro crater, which is the zone that would be right next to it, looks like. And the Lei Shen with his Mogu comes marching in with a bunch of this high-ranking Zandalari leadership, and just as like a majority of their army enters Uldum, they decide to set off the Forge of Origination. But they've set it to only be like 1% power, basically. So instead of the entire world that it purges, it just incinerates the entire nearby area. So with this being the case, it completely scours all life from Uldum. So all of the trees and everything are gone. All the water is gone. And Lei Shen is killed, along with a bunch of these other high-ranking Zandalari. And it now leaves this lush jungle being just a barren desert land. And that kind of throws the Zandalari spiraling. This is really kind of the beginning of their downfall, I would say, and the Trolls' downfall in general. Because with this shock and this calamity, they begin to have a problem. Because when they agreed with Lei Shen to help him out, Lei Shen also promised the Zandalari, hey, we'll give you a bunch of the land that we take over together. So with him gone and the Mogus not really, well, they're slaves now beginning to rise up against them, they are like, well, who's going to give us our land now? And they're like, we'll just do what they did, right? So like 300 years after Lei Shen dies, the Pandaren begin to rise up against the Mogu. And with this, they have their leader of the Pandaren at this time, basically a figure by the name of Zhang. And Zhang is the first person who forms what is known as the Order of the Cloud Serpent, which is just essentially a fancy way to say the dragons of Pandaria. So they begin to tame and ride these mystical dragon-like beings of Pandaria, and with this, they are able to face off against the Zandalari's, dinosaurs. I don't know if I mentioned it. We did mention it with the raptors, but the Zandalari, like their whole culture, they have like these big ass dinosaurs that they ride into battle and stuff like that. They ride like pterodactyls through the sky. They have the best troll druids.
Yeah, they do look awesome. They do, and they
cool.
have some sick mounts too.
Like the Longboy.
The Longboy, but also the other dinosaurs, the Stegosaurus, not the Stegosaurus, but the
Direhorns.
Right. The Direhorns, exactly.
Yeah, so they all ride dinosaurs and stuff like this, and with the help of these now dragon-like creatures, the Pandarens do manage to defeat this invading Zandalari army and manage to build their own life and their own culture within Pandaria and force the Zandalari to retreat back to Zandalar. And again, like I said, this is only the beginning of their downfall because, hey, getting reports from the north that those dark trolls that decided to go sit around the Well of Eternity for the last 5,000 years or so, they're nothing like what they used to be. They've been magically transformed, essentially, or magically accelerated by this well. And they've turned into what they're referring to themselves as the Kaldori, the Night Elves. And they have their own religion now. They have their own culture now that is built around worshiping the moon and worshiping arcane magic, which again is something that the trolls don't really understand. The Zandalar got some of the secrets from the Mogu, but they don't understand it, certainly not to the degree that the Well of Eternity would give them. And that kind of just leads into another war. This now growing Kaldori Empire, which would eventually be led by Queen Azshara, just begins to scatter scatter across every part of Kalimdor, and their empire pushes all of these trolls. The Empire of Zul that was once completely ruling over everything is kind of fractured already because their different tribes aren't all together anymore. But even more than that, it's just that they aren't as powerful as they were when they fought the Aqir, and they do not really stand a chance against the Night Elves' arcane magic. So the Night Elves begin to just push all the trolls basically out of their lands and kind of keep them corralled on what is essentially the coastlines of Azeroth, especially modern day Azeroth.
So they're mainly using arcane like a mage would right now? They're not really being druids.
No, Malfurion's the first druid.
Okay, so not even druid. Interesting.
Yep.
When I think Night Elves, I think druids.
Yeah, it does seem like they have some connection to nature and stuff like that. Like I said, they do worship a loon, who is the moon goddess, but it is definitely not the same. And the only people I feel like that are kind of even spared by this are the Zandalari, and that's because they come to an agreement with Azshara. She's like, I don't even want your guys' land. I'll let you keep it, but you have to make sure that your people don't attack my people, or you'll be next, I promise. And even though it is really super embarrassing for them and not a fair deal at all in their favor, they don't really have a choice but to accept. And this is where their entire species enters just a period of decline. So they come to a truce with Azshara. They're like, we won't raid your places if you don't kill us all, basically. And it remains that way for thousands of years, maybe hundreds of years. I think it'd be about 2,000 years, like 2,200 years that this would go on for. Until Azshara does the thing, right? The War of the Ancients, the invasion of the First Legion, the Sundering happens. And, with the Sundering, the planet cracking and all of the land masses shifting apart from each other, as well as a bunch of the land masses that the trolls even did inhabit in the center of Kalimdor just being flooded by what will become the Great Sea. A lot of these troll races are really just shadows of what they once were. And while there is the benefit that it is kind of also the downfall of the Kaldori Empire, it does lead to what is a struggle for their people to maintain their own identity. Zandalar in specific is now an island landmass just in the middle of the Great Sea, far away from the Eastern Kingdoms, far away from Kalimdor, where their other troll brethren would have been at this time, and they're kind of just alone on this island now.
Does it destroy their temples and stuff?
It doesn't seem like it. It seems like with the magic that they had been able to learn from the Mogu, they were able to kind of fortify their area enough that it doesn't get, just tsunamied over. But regardless, they are, like I said, just a fragment of what they once were. But they do kind of discover a new identity of being like a seafaring race, of being able to build ships and to cross the seas at will, which is actually where they come across this island known as Kazan. And Kazan is inhabited by these little guys, and these little guys are goblins. And they are like, wow, you guys are really cool. You're kind of primitive at this moment. You have like a rudimentary intelligence at this time. But also we noticed that underneath your guys' little city you got here, you have what is called Khagamite, which is, it doesn't really make it clear why they want Khagamite, but they do consider it like this holy stone that is used in lots of their rituals. So they're like, ooh, subjugation time. And they enslave the goblins, and they force them to mine this mineral for thousands of years as well, I'm pretty sure.
Wait,
And
goblins are in the Horde, and so are Zandalari. You're telling me they're cool?
I guess so.
Just, okay.
Don't know what to tell you. Yep. But that is what leads us into what is called the Council of the Tribes. In Zandalar, there is basically no one ruler at this time. There's a bunch of civil strife going on. And instead of having like one king like they used to with the Tsar, they now just have a bunch of ruling council members of all these different tribes that live in the city. But that does give certain people a bit too much freedom, because that is the first time that they are going to summon a Loa that is a really not cool guy, and he is the ancient Loa of blood who goes by the name of Aqir the Soul Flare. And Aqir's whole thing is that he basically gains more, most of the Loa gain more power through their worship, through having more and more like followers and stuff like that. But Aqir gains his power through people who worship him, basically playing off their hatred and playing off their violence. So he kind of just sees a bunch of these trolls and he's like, here, take this. And he gives them what we know as the corrupted blood plague. And it kills thousands of trolls during this time. A ton of these trolls die. And where before they previously would bury their dead, they consider that these bodies are too plagued and too fucked up, really, to continue following this custom. So they begin to burn their dead instead and keep them sealed away in these special urns. And while it started off being this way, the Zandalari kind of continue this trend just as their new custom moving forward. And Aqir will go do some other stuff in some other place. But yeah, it is the first time that the Zandalari are like, oh fuck, maybe the Loa aren't always the coolest guys.
And yet some still worship him. Do they worship him because they're scared it's gonna happen again?
Well, he does empower his followers in a certain way, and we will see that as we move into this next segment. But again, it is like his whole goal is to have people be violent and have them kill each other and have them hate each other. So with that being the case, like if he were to empower one side too much and they were to ever win the war and there were to be peace, that's not what he wants. He wants violence. So the Zandalari kind of looking to help out, and we're time skipping a pretty good amount here, probably like 5,000 years at this point. This will be 2,800 years before the Dark Portal opens and the first Horde comes through. The Zandalari hear about their friends up in the Eastern Kingdoms in the north, who are coming into beef with what are the High Elves of Quel'Thalas. So the Zandalari, kind of looking to bolster them, is like, hey, we'll send some of our priests over there and they'll be able to call up the Loa and we'll help you guys out. So they're looking to kind of reestablish their empire through these escapades, these missions, emissaries, stuff like that, right? And it really works out for them, because when they go up there, they kind of bless a bunch of their dudes with the power of these Loa, and then they wage war on the kingdom of Quel'Thalas. And with the power of the Loa, they do begin to kind of crush a bunch of these high elven factions as well as cities, just whatever you want to have it. And it is what we referred to as the Troll Wars back in the Blood Elf episode. And like we also mentioned in that episode, the high elves will eventually be like, we'll get some allies too. And they meet up with the humans. And the humans are like, yeah, we'll help you out if you give us magic. So they're like, cool. We'll train what we refer to as the first 100 human mages. And with the power of these human mages, even though it literally describes it as tens of thousands of trolls at every single one of these battles, they are just obliterated by firestorms like in the image, and they are just destroyed by the assistance of this human kingdom until they are really just it feels bad to even call them a shadow of themselves, because that's what they already were with the Amani, and now they are just like the remnants of a shadow. They are the dust left over after their empire has completely crumbled, really.
The most bullied race.
Yep, and that is why this episode's probably going to be something like the rise and fall of an empire or something like that.
You kill so many trolls.
Yep. And, I mean, even when we reach, like, classic WoW, and you're playing as, like, Darkspear trolls and stuff like that, you do see that, like, even trolls hate trolls, so...
Yeah, you're killing trolls as a troll, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, the Amani lose. The Zandalari were not able to help them win this war, and they go back to Zandalar, and they're like, yep, our legacy's really kind of getting fucked. And Zandalar's like, damn, that's tough, buddy. At least we're safe here on our island and we're going to rule forever, right? Right? And there is also that island of Khazan that I mentioned, where after this time has passed, this is about 100 years before the Dark Portal opens, these goblins have inhaled so much of this Khajiite dust and be able to enhance their dormant intelligence over these years to the point where they begin to be kind of master craftsmen. They're not the master craftsmen in the way that the gnomes are, but it's similar. They begin to kind of build these. I mean, if you've ever seen goblin tech, it looks like it probably shouldn't work, or at the very least that it only works because it's duct taped in the right places. But regardless, it works. And they begin to build traps, build firearms, build explosives that manage to overthrow their Zandalari oppressors, because they really weren't paying attention to what they thought the witless goblins were doing. And with the goblin uprising, they do manage to completely overthrow Zandalar and push them off the island of Khazan, where they will have the most major of their factions on this island become known as the cartels.
Oh, similar to the ones that we just saw come out in Undermine, huh?
Probably one and the same, to be honest. I don't have the for sure facts if it's like the Steam Weedle and stuff like that, but I would have to imagine it is. It's only 100 years before, Warcraft 1 happens, so I would imagine so. But there is also, like we do mention, the other tribes that don't really like each other. And one of these specifically that has a fracture in power is the Gurubashi, who live in the south of the Eastern Kingdoms, and mostly what is the Stranglethorn Vale. And specifically, there is a sub-faction of these Gurubashi known as the Darkspear tribe. And the Darkspear tribe are, well, they don't really fuck with what a lot of the Gurubashi are getting up to. A lot of the Gurubashi are beginning to worship Aqir, the Soulflare, like I mentioned, and using that power to wage war on each other, as well as these other empires and stuff like that. So the Darkspear hate them. They don't really fuck with a lot of the other people, and they're being pushed out of the Stranglethorn Vale, where at some point after the first portal has been opened and after the second war has begun, after Stormwind's already been destroyed, these trolls are then pushed off the Stranglethorn Vale, and they become kind of a seafaring race, where they then go into these islands that exist somewhere within the Great Sea. It seems like it's somewhere near Kul Tiras, because that's kind of who they come into conflict with when you play Warcraft 3. But they go to what we would just know as the Darkspear Islands, and that's where they live for however long until Warcraft 3. So probably like 10, 20 years, something like that. But there is also, during that second war, Zul'Jin, who we mentioned is the leader of the Amani trolls at this time, who agrees to work with Orgrim Doomhammer to crush the High Elves, who they still really fucking hate and have been fighting with for the last 2,800 years, right? So they, along with certain of these other troll tribes, like the Raven Tusk, who exist in the area known as the Hinterlands, to the like kind of northeast-ish area, not quite as far as the Amani live, they begin to fight with the first horde that has come through the portal to help overtake this. Gul'dan betrays the horde, they abandon Quel'Thalas, they're unable to take it, and this really pisses off Zul'Jin and the Amani, who now kind of hate the horde as well. And that is why the Amani do fight with the horde come the time. And the Raven Tusk that we mentioned, they don't hate the horde, but they are just like, we're going to go back to kind of how we originally were when these orcs came through, and we're just not going to interact with you guys. This would lead into Warcraft 3, where you would have the orcs having been enslaved in these internment camps for 10, 15, 20 years, something like that. And you have Thrall now freeing a bunch of them and then taking the advice of the prophet Medivh to cross the Great Sea and go to Kalimdor. And that is where, as he's crossing the sea, he will be hit by a storm and crash into the Darkspear Islands. And they, kind of begin to help each other out. They're also being chased by, like I said, portions of the Alliance, like the Kultirans, as they crash land here. And the two of them, Sen'Jin of the Darkspear and Thrall of the Horde, begin to work together and ultimately lay the foundation for what would be the first Horde, or the first modern Horde, at least. Unfortunately, Sen'Jin is killed by a bunch of murlocs, trash, and a witch that is a Naga. They call her like a witch, and she is kind of a spellcaster, but it's really just like a side story in the game. But eventually Thrall's like, all right, our ships are ready to go. We're getting back off this island. And the Darkspear trolls are like, all right, we'll come with you. So they all begin to make their way together across the sea to what would be Durotar, stuff like that, the Echo Isles eventually. Specifically, the new leader of these Darkspear trolls, Vol'Jin.
So is this the same Vol'Jin that fought with Orgrim?
No, so you're thinking of Zul'Jin. I know these troll names are so confusing. But yeah, so Vol'Jin is the son of Sen'Jin, the leader of the Darkspear before he's killed. And he is he's a shadow hunter, just to make that clear. He is one of those kind of battle priests in the same way that a kind of battle priest for what a troll would be. And yeah, he's a shadow hunter, so he is already really highly respected. And he actually there's a short story that you can read about how he becomes a shadow hunter, where him and his young friend Zalazane, who you will encounter in classic World of Warcraft, kind of go into this jungle and do this ritual and stuff like that. And it's not too clear how shadow hunters still come to be after they leave the island, because this is kind of like a ritualistic process that they do on the island, and they don't live there anymore. But details, right?
He was friends with Zalazane.
Yeah, they were besties.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure we fight him.
Yep, he's level 10. He's on the island, and I bet he's killed tons of hardcore characters at this point.
True, I think he's killed me on hardcore.
He'll shrink you, and he'll just ruin your entire day, bro. But with this, the Horde begins to really form its identity out in Durotar with the Tauren, with the trolls. And they even reach back out to the tribes that were in the hinterlands. There are like 3 different ones. There's the Vile Branch, the Witherbark, and the Raventusk. And the Vile Branch and the Witherbark are like, yeah, we know what happened the last time we allied with you guys. Fuck off. And the Raventusk are just like, okay, why not? So they are still pretty fragmented, but at the very least, they do have this faction of trolls that ally with the Horde on the Eastern Kingdom side. And there is also, in the far south of Kalimdor, this former tribe of the Gurubashi known as the Sand Fury. And they now live in this capital of Zul'Farrak. And Zul'Farrak used to be like a once great kingdom and stuff like that, but unfortunately, they've had to deal with ogres, they've had to deal with Wastewander bandits, which are humans, the Silithid, which are the descendants of the Aqir, as well as us, as the Horde and the Alliance. So Zul'Farrak is just left in shambles at this point, and is really nothing amazing. And they, like I said, they've had to deal with the Horde, they've had to deal with the Alliance, so they really hate us as well. And it's not my fault. I needed that carrot on a stick.
True. We killed their like big monster pet too.
They actually worship Gazrilla as a god.
We killed their god. Oh, is that what that was?
Yeah.
So on farm too, dude. I would repeat that dungeon. It was great XP.
Indeed. Back in the Stranglethorn Vale, though, there is Zul'Gurub. And Zul'Gurub, like I mentioned, the Gurubashi, a lot of them have been worshipping Aqir, the blood god. And he kind of has these factions of specific Gurubashi trolls known as the Hakari and the Ataya. Atali? It's hard. And they're really just zealots. And they're basically like, if you don't worship the blood god, you getting put in the ground, right? And so there's already a bunch of civil strife amongst the Gurubashi tribes. And the new leader of Zandalar hears about this, and remembering what happened the last time the Aqir was on Azeroth, he goes to send a bunch of his dudes out there to be like, specifically his priest. He sends his priests out there to try and convince the people that, well, this has to stop, as well as to do what they can to stop Aqir. And a bunch of his priests are enslaved and turned into like hex priests and stuff like that, right? So with that being the case, he's like, I don't really got the numbers to go fight that, so we'll put the word out. And that's when he tells the world of Azeroth, like, yep, Aqir is a blood god. He is a really fucked up person. He will kill everybody given the opportunity. So if you don't want that to be you, you should go and stop that. And it draws the attention of the Horde. Let's go. I did find out that we asked this in the last episode, if it was the Horde or the Alliance that canonically solves the problem in Zul'Gurub and fights Aqir. and it is the Horde as well. So
Horde did a lot of good. I don't know anyone saying the Horde are the bad guys.
they were sure the good guys before Mists of Pandaria. Then they went on about a 5 expansion spree of being the worst.
They had a bad leadership, and that's not the true Horde. Let me just say that.
Yep. So the Horde enter into Zul'Gurub, and they fight a bunch of the Soul Flayer's minions, including his main witch doctor Jindo. So they fight with a bunch of his guys, including his main worshipper Jindo. And with this, they manage to banish the Soul Flayer of Aqir from the realm of Azeroth while ripping out his heart, apparently, because that is the drop item that you get, and it actually does have lore. So yeah, they defeat Aqir, they rip his heart out, and they take it to one of these Zandalari trolls called Multhor. And Multhor, using a bunch of his shadow priests or shadow hunters, whatever you want to refer to them as, on the Stranglethorn Vale Islands, banishes this heart of Aqir from the realm of Azeroth as well. And that is actually what gives you the buff, the Spirit of Zandalar, if you're, standing in the Isles themselves or in Booty Bay.
It's a great buff, man. Increased movement speed and stats, I'm pretty sure is what it is.
Yep, 15% to all stats, bro. I think it's the best world buff that you can get in the game.
Well, I mean,
Dragon Slayer's good, Rend is good, but comparatively for every single class in the game, there are certain classes that do not really benefit from those other ones, but every class would benefit from this. And movement speed's always great, right? Especially in Classic WoW, where I'm going to go on a casual walk for the next 20 minutes.
You should be getting all the buffs, but yeah.
But yeah, so that is what gives you the Spirit of Zandalar buff in Classic World of Warcraft, and that is kind of what leaves us at the end of this troll story, leading into what would be the Burning Crusade and so on and so forth. So you have defeated Aqir, the Zandalari and other tribes kind of return back to their lands in Zandalar, and the Horde and the Dark Spear are allies, kind of doing their heroic stuff, like you mentioned, being a real champion of the world at this point. And
until they weren't.
Until they don't. But again, that's not for another few expansions at least, so
they never really got back to the fraction of what they were.
Kinda. When we're still just one expansion removed from, or I guess 2 expansions if you really want to be technical about it, from the Horde being kind of villainized and fragmented as they were. But regardless, yeah, that is where we are left. The Dark Spear have joined the Horde, the Raven Tusk of the Hinterlands have joined the Horde, and the trolls are definitely not done. As we move into Cataclysm, they will have their own kind of really beefy storyline. But that is all that we have for today. Alrighty. Well, make sure you guys follow us on socials. We're on socials, TikTok, all that fun stuff. And we will see you guys on the next episode. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. Your guys' support truly means the world to us. If you're interested in hearing more, we have our full show on YouTube and Spotify, new episodes dropping every Tuesday. I also want to take this moment to give a special thank you to Fantasy Lo-Fi for providing the music for this episode. You can find them on YouTube at Fantasy Lo-Fi or on Spotify under Bits and Hits. Be sure to show them some love, as their music does truly bring this journey to life. Once again, thank you for joining us on Tides of Lore, and we will see you next week.